We're learning Basi Lagani 1985, the second time through. The Rebbe went through the cycle of the 20 chapters, and here we are learning chapter 15. The Rebbe's second time through it, and we're going to be Os Base. We're still amongst sort of the introduction, as I told you guys in the beginning of each mimer every year. The Rebbe sort of brings us up to speed to the chapter that we're going to be working on. So he didn't really dive into chapter 15 at all yet. He's just bringing us there. So, okay, so it says like this. Mevar behemshech hamaymer. We're going to be at the Os Base. The Friedrich Rebbe continues in his mimer. Sheklalos ha'avoda la'afoch es sheker ha'olam liyos krashim lemishkan lo yisbarach, that the general avoda to transform the sheker of the world to becoming the crushing of the Mishkan. Remember, as he said, they're the same letters. You have to use the Gashmias, and that's what creates the highest level of holiness. How do you do it? The Friedrich Rebbe explains this is accomplished by the Jewish people, specifically when they get this title called Tzivos Hashem. Why is it that the work of making a Mishkan for Hashem is associated with the Jewish people called their title Tzivos Hashem, the legions of Hashem? Does anyone remember why? What is it about that title that describes us as being the ones who are able to turn the shtus into kedusha?
When you see Hashem in every piece of darkness that is showing himself, so this is why you're in his army fighting this war, it shows us the most crazy thing, and you need to get that. It's you, Hashem. Stop hiding yourself.
So what is it about the army that shows that? Why can't we just be called Bnei Yisrael and do that?
We are humble ourselves with that name.
Okay, so let's see. Why is it that we're called Tzivos Hashem? Right? The Inyan Bezeh, and he says the idea is the Hine Shleimus Avoda Hi Be'ofen Shel Avdus, because you can only really do the service if you're a servant. In other words, you're a slave. You have to put yourself into a situation of total, Mesiras Nefesh and Kabbalah soul. What is it? What does it mean to call us Tzivos Hashem, the army, the legions of God? Like a soldier. The soldier says, you're going to Lebanon, you're going to Syria.
Yeah.
You can't say, I'm tired this morning, maybe I'll go to Syria tomorrow. You suit up, you get your gun, and you put your life on the line, and that's just what's going on. So it's a total removal of any sense of putting your own 2 cents into it. When you act like Tzivos Hashem, this is how you accomplish this notion of basically freeing yourself from Mitzrayim and creating this transformation of the darkness of the world into, you listen, it's all connected to our conversation, right? Because if you're going to use sort of like your rational approach, you don't get the ability to transform the darkness into light. Like the whole idea is that you're going to take this medium of physicality, and just like it is sort of irrationally being physical, like we said, remember the end of the other mimer, like why is it that you see a person, you come and meet them and like you grab their hand and you shake it? Maybe you grab your left hand. Maybe we should do like a little bow and dance around each other. What is it all? It's just crazy. Like we're just doing things because the world does them. The idea is you have to be just as stubbornly crazy for Hashem. Don't use your sense, your common sense. Use your kedusha sense and be at it like a soldier. This is how you turn the darkness of worldliness into crushing, sheker into kesher, into keresh. So okay, it's called avdus. Kamo Moshe Rabbeinu. Shaya Evid Ne'eman. Moshe in the Torah is called a Evid Ne'eman, which means a trusted servant, right? It says that in all of my house, only Moshe was called the trusted servant, right? We've got some Samech Vavers over here, some maybe a little bit out of my league because you guys are fresh at it, but there's the idea of an Evid Ne'eman and an Evid Pashut. What is the difference between an Evid Ne'eman and an Evid Pashut? Does anyone want to try and put their hat in the ring on that one?
Evid Pashut, he doesn't do it for his own pleasure, only the pleasure of the master. And Evid Ne'eman, he does it for the pleasure of the master, but he also gets pleasure from himself.
Exactly, right? So for example, it sounds like on a simple face of it, that you'd rather be an Evid Ne'eman than an Evid Pashut. Because an Evid Pashut, he's a simple person. He could be a simple person, right? He doesn't necessarily have an understanding of the sophistication of what his master is asking him to do. So therefore, he could also get like some jobs that are just very simple. He's going to go carry the trash. He's not going to be appointed per se to the polishing of the pearls or to working the inner recesses of the master's business and his books. Right? You can have an Eved who's mamish like Eliezer, who was like running the whole household of Abraham. Right? Because the Eved is trusted servant, and he basically understands a little bit of like the glory of what the master's up to. So while on one hand, he's sort of an elevated figure, but on the other hand, his bittul to the master is not as complete. Why? Because you might say that he's like Yeshua just said, he's not only having the pleasure because the master is having pleasure, he's also having a little bit of his own pleasure because he understands the value of polishing pearls and being on top of the books and the background and the whole cheshbonos of the operation. So therefore, he's doing everything, and he's Moshe Rabbeinu was called an Eved Natman. It's not a bad level, but there's even a higher level because the idea is that when you're an Eved Pashut, you have zero sense of self. If the master's happy, then that is literally my happiness. I don't have my own happiness. Right? If the master's happy, I experience his happiness, and therefore you're like truly a conduit to holding on to, right, the actual God without any notion of self whatsoever. So he says this is what's required in order to turn the shtus into kedusha. You should be an Eved Neman, and if you can push it a little further, you can even be an Eved Pashut, Kamavur Behemshech Samik Vav, as the Rebbe Rashab explains at great length over there. Now, either way, whether you're a simple servant or a trusted servant, the point is that a servant serves with Mesiras Nefesh, right? You're not doing it because it makes sense to you or because you have pleasure. You're doing it because you're like a soldier. The Yeser Al Kain, and this is a little bit of a tricky one, Yoshua. Help us work this out. But he says even more so, Yisrael hem banim la'avinu shebashamayim. The Jewish people are also called children to Hashem, your God, right? So he says Yesod on K, which means seemingly this is even a higher level than the Eved Pashut. And he says, V'hariyavoras haben avraviv he gam kim b'chinas mesiras nefesh. But the truth is that the son for his father, if he's the really worthy of being called a son, he also serves the father with total mesiras nefesh. V'adarabba, and on the contrary, od yoser ma mesiras nefesh de Eved. Even more than the serious nefesh of an Eved. Is that clear? Yeah?
The Eved, he has to do the avodah. But the son, he just wants his father to have what he wants, so it doesn't have to be him to do it. Who by any means do what the father wants.
So in other words, it's not because he has a job.
It doesn't have to be him to do it. If the father needs something for the son to do, the son doesn't even take entitlement to do the avodah like the Eved does.
The son doesn't care if someone else does it, you're saying.
Yeah, he just wants it done for the father, whether it's him or someone else.
Whereas the Eved, even the Eved Pashit, he needs to have it done.
Yeah.
He has to do it himself.
Like a personal thing, is like he feels like he has to do it and not anyone else.
The Eved,
So the son basically needs, the son wants the pleasure of the father. That's the main thing that he wants.
right.
The father to be happy, whereas the Eved is.
So the Eved, his pleasure is the father's pleasure, is the master's pleasure. But
it's still his pleasure.
but he's the one that's basically accomplishing the pleasure.
Yeah.
But
the
this,
son, he doesn't need to accomplish it.
he doesn't need to, as long as the father is happy, even if he doesn't get the satisfaction of
He doesn't have to do it.
Okay, but why is that?
It's like Avraham Avinu, whether it's he serves like when he gets to reach the mind of the serious nefesh shalom, he doesn't care. It's not, he just wants to do what Hashem wants.
Because normally it starts off by saying that the Eved is the Eved is higher than the son, right? There is such a part of that whole sugi is that the son gets to go into he understands the pleasure of the father. He's even more than Eved Netman because he actually has like the DNA of the father. And like the mamish pleasure that the father, like the Eved Ne'eman, the trustworthy servant, he's still a servant. He's not like at the level of the king. So therefore, he can sort of have an understanding of what the king enjoys. But the son is mamish like the king. So he actually experiences the pleasure of the king himself. He has the keys, right, to the hidden treasure house, etc. And he can go like rummage around, like a tzaddik, it's like this son can like rummage around in Hashem's hidden treasures. So therefore he has a disadvantage because he's like stuck with the pleasure of the king, that he's born getting pleasure from that, and he can't sort of shake it. So therefore, his yeshus is sort of stuck with him. And then what he describes over there is if the son can then be also an Eved, then he gets this quality of being even a greater than the regular Eved. But he has to be an Eved, right? It's not just the son. Right.
Becomes an Eved, now the mind of being an Eved, which isn't the Gila, it's very like just a Voda, that itself becomes a Gila. The Matzah Torah is given by the Malachim, which is the Malakolam, and then so Kolam mostly the Gila. But the mind just of itself of being a Ben is that the Chasron is the Giloin, that like he's not able to reach an Eved unless he becomes an Eved.
Wait, hold on a second. His chasaron of being a son is that he's not an Eved, which means he so to speak can't tap into the Sovev, like the straight. What's that? Okay, because he doesn't have the he's batlus of just.
The Maila is that it doesn't have to be him to do the Voda. Like he doesn't have to reach a level of a serious message. As long as the father gets what he needs to get.
That's even when he's not an Eved, you're saying.
Yeah, that's the Maila.
So he has a Maila of a Ben.
The father tells him to do something, it doesn't even begin. If there's someone better to do it, he will wait to give it over to him. Because he just wants the father's will fulfilled. Whereas the Eved has to be him. Which is like more selfish.
It's a lot of complications in there. I'm holding up the whole class because you really have to learn like this whole few mimers of Samech Vav to like mamish remember all these little details. Let me just did you learn the last few mimers of Samech Vav over there?
But I remember you saying this. There's a difference of tzivui.
No, yeah, I got that. He's gonna say basically. Actually, someone asked me just the other day, is it okay to just do the avoda because Hashem says so? If you have no pleasure from that, remember that we had this conversation. So he says over here, when the Yisrael is a son, Adrabi is even more Mesiris Nefesh than the Eved, and you're saying basically because he doesn't have to do it himself. As it says in the Zohar, Kabara di Ishtadol Basar Avoy, like a son who goes running after to serve his father, and he wants to serve him yeser migarme. He wants to give the father more than for himself. In other words, the idea is that he is happy to totally sacrifice his own self in order so that the father has what he wants, right? Umaser garme, he gives himself over. So this is what it says in Tanya over there, chapter 10, like the definition of a tzaddik gamur, right? That he wants to, he's serving Hashem for the sake of Hashem's pleasure, not his own pleasure. So, but the son, in theory, it does experience the pleasure of what Hashem experiences, but he's able to take it to this level where he's not doing it for his own pleasure. He's doing it for the sake of the pleasure of his father, and he would actually forego his own pleasure for that. All right, Rafi, what were you going to say?
It's kind of the difference between Ira and Ahava. The Eved is doing it from Ira, and the Ben is doing it from a place of Ahava. It's almost like this difference of Tivui, Ben Olam Hazeh, Olam Haba. That in Olam Haba you become like the Ben, that you're doing it from a place. It doesn't matter if you tell me not to do what to do. I want to serve you because intrinsically I'm your son. It's my nature to serve you. The Eved is like a position that is appointed, that is commanded. So now I have to do this because even though I get pleasure from it, in the end I had to be enslaved to be able to do what makes me happy. The Ben is like a natural state of service.
So I think what Yeshua is saying here, to mix it all together with what you're saying, is that there's sort of two different things, Giloy and Etzem, right? Which is essentially if revelation and essence. So the disadvantage of any of let's say of the Eved Ne'eman or the son is that they can experience Giloyim, they can experience revelation. So why is that a disadvantage? Because as soon as they experience revelation, it's hard for them to say that they're purely doing it because of the command, right? There is a certain level of like natural self-satisfaction that they're stuck with. Whereas the Eved Pashut, because he doesn't even know to feel the experience of the pleasure from it, the only thing that he has is the command, and therefore he sort of is putting on display a total sense of servitude, more than the Eved Netman, more than the Ben, because he's able to essentially just be fulfilling what's being required of him. There's no sense of self. And then I think the idea is that if you have the full level of revelation, which is the Ben, he experiences more than anybody, but then he accepts upon himself the yoke of the servant, so then he's able to now access the level of essence, but because he's also sort of a master of Giloy, right? Because he has the most revelation, he actually brings the essence to Giloy, which shows itself as that he's happy to do the even for someone else to do the service. Because in other words, that's what it means. Like the Giloim should come through even if he receives nothing. Something like that. All right. The truth is, this is a good opportunity for us to remind ourselves we have to go back and take a look at Samech Vav. He says, basically, this is what's called the famous Hemshech of Mikne Rav, and Bli Neder, I'm going to look at it. Because we're not doing this justice. Maybe if we need a little shear from Yoshua. Okay, but in our present state of ignorance, let's just look at what he's saying here. There's 3 levels, right? And he's saying that a Yid needs to be coming to the state of Avdus and total servitude in order to reach this level of the Tzivos Hashem. And he lays out 3 levels, and seemingly in order of greatness. The trusted servant, the simple servant, and then even the son who's higher because he's chasing after his father's needs and willing to sacrifice his own. V'zeu, 7 lines down, she'avoda la'asos es ha'olam le'mishkan lo yizborech, and this is why to make a mishkan for Hashem in this world, naisa aydei bnei Yisrael, this is why the Jewish people have to do it, shenikrayim b'shem tzivos Hashem, specifically when we take upon ourselves this title of the legions of Hashem, because it incorporates this notion of Mesiras Nefesh, that we're willing to do it without any self-involvement. And if you don't do it that way, you're unable to create this shift of the sheker into the keresh. Like this is like the ingredient that's required. So, this is an important point. Ki avoda zu hi ba'ofen shel Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, to do that avoda requires a total giving in of all of your selfish desires to this effect. Right? Therefore, it becomes through the legions. Who inyan of Mesiras Nefesh? The whole inyan of a legion is nothing other than Mesiras Nefesh. They might do a lot of other things. You have cooks in the army, and you've got cleaners in the army, you've got engineers in the army. But so what's the difference when a civilian engineer and an army engineer is Mesiras Nefesh, right? Like at the end of the day, they're going to just do it because of the command, etc. Fine. Umam Shech Levayer. The mimer goes on. Right? Again, he's just pulling us up to speed. He goes on to explain Klalos Inyan, the Tzivos Hashem, Al Pi Mashal. He gives an example by way of analogy of a king of flesh and blood. Shebishvil nitzachot milchama poseach hamelech gam asa otros hachi yekarim. In order to win the war, he opens up the most deepest and wealthiest treasure houses, precious treasure houses. V'hainu shekola otros she'atzur v'kibet hu v'amosav, that all of the treasures that he and his father have gathered, otros yikarim, precious treasures, v'ad lebechinas yakar mikol yakar, to the point of the most possible precious thing that could be in the treasure house, v'genuzim v'kamusim me'ein kol roa, and they're hidden and covered from any eyes, not even allowed to see them, let alone take them out and use them. Hainu shalozu bilvad she'enu mishtamish behem l'shum davar. Not only are these things never used, ela od zo she'enu megaliosum le'enei achedim. They're not even shown to people other than the king himself. Hine bishvil nitzuach hamilchama mebaz bezamelech es osros. But nonetheless, in order to win the war, he's willing to, in a wasteful way, let these things out of the treasure house, and give them to the men of war. Now, even though he gives them, as we said many times, to the generals, the purpose is that the generals should then distribute them to the soldiers that are standing in the actual war, in order that they should actually win the war. Now, according to this mashal, we can understand the analog, what we're trying to talk about, where he says, in fact, like every mashal and analogy that exists in the world, or mostly in Torah. It says shenishtalshelu mihen. In other words, it's not just happens to be a mashal, comes to explain to you this higher principle of the nimshal. It's actually the other way around. Because there's something like in the heavenly realms which works in a certain way, it actually contracts itself and becomes the mashal. If it's a true mashal of Torah, so it's like a perfect mashal because it is the embodiment of a spiritual concept. It starts, in other words, in the heavens and it reaches down to earth. Unlike what we normally think of a mashal, that we'll find something in this world and we'll say, oh, this kind of reminds me of a concept. A true Torah mashal goes the other way. There are metaphysical concepts, and basically they manifest themselves down here in this world as a mashal. So if this is a mashal of a king of flesh and blood who's willing to empty out the deepest treasure houses, what is it referring to? What made that be in this world? There's this idea that in order to win the war, which he brings out this pasuk, which is one of a very deep theme in the whole Basi Lagani, which is this pasuk Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, which means, on a simple level, it means that Netzach Yisrael is referring to God, and the Netzach Yisrael means essentially he who is like the Jews' victory or the eternal one of Israel. He never lies, right? But there's also this idea of Netzach Yisrael. Also, is this aspect inside of ourselves, which is called the midah of Netzach, which is essentially when you get into a situation, right? When you run into an obstacle, you win every time. Like you don't back down to the point that anything and everything that could possibly be thrown out at you, you will overcome, even if you have to die for the cause. And in a certain sense, I'm just thinking about this, my little 2 cents right now, but Netzach Yisrael lo yeshaker. It's interesting to use this lashon yeshaker, which comes to the word sheker, which really means keresh, right? What makes it so there's never going to be any sheker anymore? This idea of Netzach Yisrael, right? It automatically undoes the sheker of the world, because if you're willing to lose and not stand on your principle, it means you're letting the sheker be there. You're letting the world sort of have its way. But if you're just unwilling to give, because the cause is a true godly cause, you stand up to it to the point that you'll give everything you have. All your intellect will follow. Your emotions will follow, right? All your money will come and follow. All your decisions making, you'll sacrifice literally everything to the point of your life. This is what a king will do. And this is the idea of what pulls out the hidden treasures, right? Of the deepest secrets of the universe. They only really will be shown and come out when there's a yid who will stand firm on his principles. So when he'll do that, Hashem will open up these treasure houses, which is essentially, what is the treasure house? It's called Netzach, which also means eternality, which means you can embody eternality. In other words, the Jews will never die, right? We are going to live forever, and we're going to be here in the end of the game. When does that show itself? When you stand up to the cause, Hashem then unloads the treasure house, which is basically Netzach, right? It's eternality, which you then will automatically transform into a keresh. You've created the Mishkan right then and there. So this is the so to speak, the mashal of the king is really the mashal of the yid who's willing to have masiras nefesh like a soldier, stand his ground. This then brings the outpouring of Hashem's secret chambers, which is eternality, and it makes us bring eternality, which is something called essentially true, into a world of sheker. Right, the sheker disappears, truth remains, which is essentially the Torah. And in doing this, Hashem will empty out all the treasure house of above. What is this? The Orein Sof. And they're delivered through the Rebbes into the generals into the hands of every Jew. As it says elsewhere, that this otzer above is actually what's called the storehouse of God-fearingness, right? The otzer shalamayla. And on this it says everything's in the hands of God except for this yirat shamayim. So you ultimately have to find your own otzer. Hashem's not going to give this to you. You have to bring this out of yourself. Find your state of yirat shamayim, which is called your otzer, and then Hashem will deliver this netzach, this eternality, and essentially change the world around you into a mishkan. This otzer is given over to those soldiers who stand firm in the war to make from this world of Sheker into a Mishkan and Mikdash lo yizbarech. Okay, so basically, we're catching up to chapter 15. Oh, this is truly an introduction, but it's good to get another introduction. Shkoyach.